Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome, I'm Julia Daily, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today was born and raised on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, but transplanted to San Diego over 50 years ago. She retired from a 35-year career in the corporate world, but soon found herself busier than ever, taking writing classes and writing up a storm about a secret she thought she would take to her grave. Along with writing her memoir, she holds the office of President of San Diego Memoir Writers Association and is an active member of the International Women Writers Guild. She is also a member of San Diego Writers Inc. and San Diego Writers and Editors Guild. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Laura L Engel.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Laura, the very first question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
Well, actually, I've always been an avid reader and always thought someday I'd write a book. And then it's so amazing because I got busy with life, raising my children and work and my career. And after I retired, I thought I would write like a little family history and write some little stories about my ancestors. I always had a lot of stories being from the South. You know what that's like. And then a miracle happened in my life. So those little family stories ended up being a memoir about something I never dreamed I would even talk about, much less write about. So that's why it took me so long. I was in my late 60s when I started writing this book. So it's never too late.
That's the theme of this podcast. I read your novel and it is poignant and it really hits home to me. Laura and I are connected because my novel had a thread of memoir running through it about being an adopted child. And Laura's novel is about being a birth mother who relinquished her son for adoption. Tell us about your book, You'll Forget This Ever Happened, Secret Shame and Adoption in the 1960s, that is available in May of 2022, just about a month from now.
Yeah, well, my book, like I said, is about a story that I never dreamed I would talk about. It was a secret I held inside of me for 49 years. Just very few people in my life knew this story. When I was 17, I became pregnant, and my parents decided, since I had no ring on my finger and my boyfriend had joined the Army, because I think he preferred that to being married and being a father, Vietnam, I guess, was not as scary as being married, but he had pretty much made it clear he didn't want anything to do with me. And my parents and the minister decided that I have my baby and give it for adoption. So I did have that son, my first son, and it was one of the toughest things you can only imagine, I'm sure, or you can imagine. It almost destroyed me. It did change the direction of my life. I decided I couldn't stay in my hometown any longer. I married the first person who asked me to marry him because I thought I was damaged goods. and moved to California, where I've been ever since. And I have gone back to visit now, of course, but it took a lot of years for that to happen as well. So I created my own life. I decided that I didn't have to talk about it. And if I didn't talk about it, maybe I wouldn't remember it, like I kept being promised. I wouldn't remember any of this. But I thought about that baby every day. I thought about that son every holiday, on his birthday. And I was always ashamed and filled with guilt, and had a burden that nobody could see on the outside. My life was successful in front of everyone's eyes. And I always thought if they only knew. So my son actually came into my life 49 years later through ancestry.com. And it was the most magical thing in the world. It was the most beautiful reunion. It was all my dreams come true. And as I was talking about it, because that's all I talked about for several months, one day I was talking about my little stories about the family, and my husband said, "You know what? This is your story." And I said, "Oh, I could never write about that time. It's too painful." And he said, "I think you should write about it." So I started journaling first about it, but I soon realized this was a story. And the more I opened up about it and talked about it, the more I realized how many people it touched, because so many of us have adoption stories in our lives, whether if they're adopted like you are, or if they're a birth mother or a birth father, or an aunt or a daughter. There were so many people would come up to me and say, "I can relate to what you're talking about." So I got brave and started going to some memoir classes because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And before I knew it, it was really going to be a book. Well, it took 5 years, but still, it started happening. And I realized this is a story I needed to tell. This was a story that I was given voice to, the 17-year-old girl I had been. And I was given voice to so many other women who had gone through a similar experience that we never could talk about. So that's how my book started.
There are over 100 million people in the U.S. who have adoption in their immediate family. So there are a lot of us out there who are affected by adoption. And there's so many complex issues around that topic. We have same-sex adoptive parents, we have open versus closed records, we have international versus domestic, and not even the flip side of that, which is abortion. So there are a lot of hot button topics around this very subject that you and I both write about. I chose to make my story fiction while you chose to make yours memoir. What were your family's reactions to your sharing of these long undisclosed secrets?
Well, unfortunately, my parents, are no longer with us. And I say fortunately only because, don't get me wrong, I miss them every day. But I don't have to deal with worrying about my truth. And other relatives, very few of them knew that are still alive what happened, because this happened in 1967. So I did worry about that, though. I thought, I'm talking about something that I was told not to talk about by them and by everyone else. And I don't know how they're going to handle it. My sons are fine with it. My son was fine with me writing about him, and he read many of the drafts. And then my other sons, because I have 3 other sons and 2 stepchildren, and they, they're all in middle age now. And I have 10 grandchildren. So it'll be interesting to see how the older ones take the book. But they were all pretty surprised. And they've all heard bits and pieces and read different parts of it, because I have had 3 different anthologies accept my work, parts of my memoir. So they've heard that. In fact, they've even heard 2 of the scenes acted out on stage. So I think they're going to be fine with it. I just, some of the relatives back in Mississippi, we'll have to see, because I don't know if my parents' grandchildren, I'm sure they don't see my parents ever doing things like, I was there and I was the daughter. Now I have one brother living and he remembers all of this as well. So it's the way it was, it was so different back then. And that's another reason I think it's important I wrote this book, because so many younger people, including my own children, could not understand how a woman like me, I'm very strong, I'm very independent, and I'm a mother, full on mother. That is the most important thing in my life, my children, my grandchildren. And they could not imagine. It was a different time. In 1967, the world was such a different place. And it was almost next to criminal for a young woman to get pregnant and not be married, and then not to have any plans to get married. And this was very common. They would ship you off to the unwed mother's home. You would have the baby, and you would be told, you're going to go back to your regular life and forget this ever happened. You never forget it. And when you're 17, you want to believe your parents, and you want to believe your minister and your adoption staff that's there at the home. We didn't even have counseling. We did not have any kind of classes or anything. It was a totally different world. And when you were 17 in 1967, it was not the same as being 17 in 2022. No. You had no choice. There was no choice.
No, and I remember, the way society was and how Victorian like my mother was, and how people thought so differently then, especially in the Deep South, but everywhere in the country. And young women today just can't even comprehend that. There's still 400 maternity homes in the U.S., but today they're working to try to help the mothers keep their babies. Yes. And try to find jobs and keep the family intact. Whereas back then, it was as if it didn't happen when you left there, and you were not to speak of it again. So times have really, really changed. And it's a time in our society that, just like the civil rights years, you just can't even imagine that happened. And it wasn't that long ago.
A lot of young women have said to me, they don't think there's been that many changes since then. There have been. We've come a long ways. I know we still have a ways to go, but we've come a long ways. Men made the decisions. Men decided what you were going to do. And we had little say about it. Nobody ever said, how do you feel about this? Yeah. What can we do to support you? If you want to keep this child, how can we help you? That was not an option. And there was no government help. There's so many good programs for young women today in that situation. And also, I think adoption's different now as well, because open adoption, I think at least where your child is. You can not necessarily communicate, but you can have photos of the child, and in some cases communicate as your child is growing up. That was not an option. You had it was closed from the minute you walked out of there. You were never supposed to have anything to do with this child again. And all the records were sealed. There was no way to find your child. And I think that's one thing that was such a burden. Every day I would wonder, is he happy? Is he healthy? Is he loved? What kind of people? And then other thing I would think, it has to be nice people, because I'm sure they looked into the people who adopted the babies. But I had that question all the time. And on his birthdays and Christmas, holidays, I would think of him all the time.
Oh, sure. I think birth mothers certainly had it a lot worse than the adoptees. But if the adoptees had a wonderful adoptive family, because that's what my birth mother told me when I searched and found her. is that she prayed in every cathedral around Europe that I was placed in a home, with parents who would love me and take care of me. She would see these stories on the news about abused children, and she would worry, did I give my child to that kind of situation? And I said, oh, I was having a great childhood while you were doing all that worrying for both of us. So
it's true. It's true. Yeah. My son had a wonderful childhood, and he was given many opportunities that I would not have been able to give him. And his parents, his adopted parents, were the ages of my parents. So he was raised by stable, older parents, whereas I would have been this young teenage girl, probably living at home. I can't even imagine how different his life would have been. And I know everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. I truly believe that. And I always worried that he would hate me if I did find him. And he didn't hate me at all.
Yeah.
He said, why would I hate you? You gave me life.
Exactly. And that's the way my dedication reads in my book. I said to my two mothers, one gave me life and one gave me a life. So, it takes both.
Yes, yes.
Well, Laura, tell us about your publishing journey. Did you query agents and go the traditional route, or did you choose another path?
Well, I was kind of confused at first because this is all such a new thing to me. And, at my age, you go through life and you get where you're accomplished in many things, and you just take it for granted that everything's easy. Well, then you start on this new venture of writing a book. Becoming a writer and an author was such a learning curve for me, because I used to think, I love books and authors, and I used to think they just sat down, they wrote their book, and it was published, and life was good, and it was over, and they went on and wrote another one. Well, it's a lot of work to write a book. And I ended up writing like 5 drafts before I was really satisfied, and had my book edited a few times. And I went to a couple of classes about query letters, and I was scared to death of them. And so I was so lucky to finally have this instructor that was just eager to help with the query letter and would read it over and edit it for you and all that. And I went that route a little bit. I went probably a few months into that. And I sent my query letters out to, I think it was 4 agents. One of them was interested, but she couldn't do anything because it was 2020, she said. And she said, get back to me next year, or whatever. I don't know why she couldn't do anything, but the COVID was going on. So maybe that was it. But anyway, and then one completely flat out said, I'm not interested in your story. Your story is nothing new. I was like, okay. And it's like, oh my gosh, I felt like such a failure. And then I boosted myself up and said, no, you're new at this. You're a newbie. It's okay. So then the other 2 were like kind of on the fence. And I had met Brooke Warner from She Writes Press at one of the Memoir Writers Association meetings. And it was the first meeting I ever went to with memoir writers. And never dreamed I'd end up, being president of Memoir Writers years later. But I went to this meeting scared to death, and I listened to Brooke Warner talk about hybrid printing, publishing. So I decided, right then and there, I thought maybe that might be a good route for me, because it seems like it takes so long to get an agent and then to get a publisher. And the closer I came to publishing, I realized I just kept going back to her over and over. And I realized maybe that was what I should be doing, because I'm the kind of person that I follow my gut. And I felt good about her. I felt good about her company. The more I looked into it, then I started interviewing authors who had gone with She Writes Press and asking them what was their experience like. And they were all so forthcoming with their information, and everybody was positive. I thought, I'm going to submit to She Writes Press. And that's what I did. I went the hybrid route. I didn't really want to self-publish, only because I didn't want to have another complete learning curve. I thought, little did I know I'd still have learning curves, but I thought this would be for me at my age. I don't want to wait 5 years. I want to do it now. And if I can do this hybrid, this is the way I'm going to do it. And that's how I did it. And I'm so happy I did.
I think we have so many options these days, with small press or indie publishing or the hybrid and self-publishing as well. We don't have to wait years to see our book in print. So I think that's exciting for us as well.
Yeah, it really is.
What about marketing strategies? Did you have a publicist? I know it's early, but have you had any what you consider successes yet, or know what works or what doesn't work?
Once again, I've taken a lot of classes on this kind of thing, or seen presentations. From everything I've read and learned from other authors, successful authors, that's another thing I've learned: never be afraid to ask, because I can honestly say I have had 99% support from any authors I've ever asked questions of. What am I doing? Am I doing this right? Could you look this over? What do you think? They're just amazing. And what I've learned is that I think it's important to have a publicist. If you want to go that route. Number one, if you can afford it, there's different prices as well. They're all kind of around the same, but then there are some now that are doing a la carte type publicity. And so that's not as expensive. But the more I looked into it, I thought, I am going to get a publicist, and I'm going to get one like a few months before so we can start building a platform. But even before that, I started putting out information about my book, because every one of them said, you need to have a platform. You need to have a website. No matter, you don't have to spend a fortune on it, but you need to have a website so that you can have people directed to your website. So that gives you start getting a little audience that way. And then also, like a year into, right before I, submitted, I started saying, I'm writing a book. I started saying on social media. I started putting information out about my story. I put it on my website. And I think that's really important. I mean, I was a title rep for title insurance. Was I really a writer? And then I started thinking, well, heck, I do it every day. I've been writing every day of my life. I must be a writer. And so then, when I had my first published piece in an anthology, somebody said, well, you're published. And I thought, well, I'm going to call myself a writer because now I'm published, So yeah, I think publicity is very important. And I did that in the field I was in for work. So it was easy for me to, talk about my company and how great it was. But to talk about yourself in your own book is a little different, and it's tough. And I think all authors, if they want to sell books, should seriously have some kind of publicist and be ready to start marketing your book, and be ready to work hard at marketing your own book, because there's so much competition now, and all publishers, even traditional, want the authors to talk about their books and to do some of their own marketing. So yes, I think marketing is very important.
Well, why don't you read a section of your book for us so that we can hear your voice and tone of the book and market that book a little bit for you.
Okay. I didn't know where. I have so many sections I really love in my book, but I wanted to read this section today because it's at the end of my book, as you can see. It's part 3, and it's a very special part to me. October 9th, 2016. Our day had been remarkably ordinary. Jean and I had enjoyed another entertaining afternoon with a group of friends and had settled down for a quiet evening. I was thinking about the book. I was thinking about the book I was reading and my to-do list for the next day as we relaxed. The presidential debate monopolized all the television networks, and we watched the first 20 minutes of it. I found it unnerving and couldn't bear to see another second. Honey, I'm taking the girls out and then heading to bed to read. I stood and stretched. Okay, I'll be in there soon. Be sure and take your phone. It's dark out there. Pecking him on the cheek, I grabbed my phone, heading out the door with Atlee and Annabelle, our chocolate lab and golden retriever. The girls, as we lovingly called them, bounded ahead of me down to the lower end of our property. All was well in our world. It was another typical fall evening in San Diego, crisp and cool, with twinkling stars scattered in a clear cobalt blue sky. A chilly breeze filled the night, and as I hurried the dogs along, immense gratitude flowed through me. My iPhone pinged. I glanced at it. Email from Ancestry.com. I decided to ignore it. I didn't plan to sit on my computer all night, scrolling through the extensive family tree I had created. Jean and I had sent in our DNA samples the year before, and had also purchased kits for all 5 of our kids. It had been fun seeing everyone's expected ethnicities and a few surprises as well. I had secretly wondered if Jamie could be in the database, but figured I would only be setting myself up for more disappointment if I thought too long and hard on that. After all, it had been almost 50 years. But what if? Glancing down at my phone, I clicked open the email. It read, parent-child match. I skidded to a stop. My knees buckled and I caught myself gasping. Heart pounding erratically, I stared at the screen. Fight or flight adrenaline surged through my body, where seconds earlier, my cheeks had felt chilled. Heat instantly scorched my face. I couldn't catch my breath and soon experienced the mother of all anxiety attacks as my body physically shifted in the most powerful and radical way. I feared I was experiencing cardiac arrest. Forgetting the dogs, I rushed into the house. Jean looked shocked at my stricken face. He called out to me, "What? What happened?" I had lost the ability to string words together and desperately shook my head, hurrying into our home office. Trembling uncontrollably, I flung my body into the chair at my desk, logging into Ancestry website with my private DNA results page. There it was, parent-child match. Beneath those words, listed along with the names of my 3 sons, a 4th and unknown name appeared. I sat paralyzed, staring at the screen. Is this really happening? My God, could this be Jamie? Who else could it be? It has to be him. Richard, a name I never would have chosen for him. They named him Richard. Jean hurried into the office after he rescued our baffled pups. Laura, what is it? What's wrong? Listen to this, honey, I cried and began reading aloud. I just received my DNA profile and Ancestry.com says we are parent-child match. I was adopted and I'm looking for more information. We sat side by side, unable to speak, simply staring at the screen. As I folded into myself, deep wrenching sobs bubbled up from a deep well of long-held hurt. Tears sprang into Jean's eyes, and he hugged me, saying, I knew this would happen one day, Laura. Do you think it's really him? My eyes met his, and I stammered, I don't know, maybe. Wait, oh yes, God, I know it's him. Who was this man? Was he friendly, hostile? Would he hate me for giving him up? Or would he forgive me? Who else could it be, Jean? Just go slow, Jean cautioned, worry replacing the shock on his face. Here was something I had wanted so badly, yet feared as well. All those long years praying I would find my son, and now he had found me on the internet. It was something I could never have dreamed of possible in 1967. Why am I so afraid? The huge secret that I'd held so long in my heart, the secret that had changed the direction of my life, was now spilling out in front of me on the computer screen. I realized I had never thought past finding Jamie.
Laura, those words, those descriptions, you had us right there with you. I was walking the dogs with you and listening to the phone ring. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
As we end our time together, can you give any advice for our authors over 50? Any advice you wish maybe that you had heard before you wrote your first book?
I would love to give them some advice. First of all, 50 is still young and you have a long ways to go. And if you want to write a book, don't you ever give up. You are never too old. You're never too old, and never feel like, even if you're a beginner, never feel like you can't achieve this thing that's so important to you. And be happy to be a beginner. Think, I'm learning something new. And also know that it can be a dream come true. And it doesn't matter what your age is. Age doesn't matter when it comes to reaching our dreams. And writing a book, there's so much beauty in it because you're going to meet people that you never would have met before. And you're going to help people that you have never even met yet.
Thank you so much, my kindred spirit, for being with us here today on Authors Over 50.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's D-A-I-L-Y, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.